Natacha Karambizi was born in Kigali, Rwanda in January 1992. 2 years later, between April and July 1994, as many as 800,000 Rwandans, mostly Tutsis, were killed by Rwandan Hutus in a genocide that began with officials and spread quickly to ordinary citizens throughout the country. While she has no personal memories of the killings during that period, she has written that, quote, "So much of my life has been affected by its consequences," end quote. Personally sheltered from most of the horror as a child, Ms. Karambizi wanted to tell her generation's story through the eyes of the children who suffered through the genocide. She wrote and published her first novel, Mahoro, the story of a 9-year-old child whose family is torn between Tutsi and Hutu. The book has received widespread critical acclaim in the United States and in Africa. Natacha Karambizi received her secondary schooling at the FAWE, the Forum for African Women Educationalists Girls' School, and at the Lycée Notre-Dame des Citeaux, both in Rwanda. Her love for reading and writing was born while she was in boarding school at FAWE. In senior secondary school, she decided to major in biology, chemistry, and math to prepare for a career as a pharmacist. In 2010, she entered Converse College to study in the Department of Chemistry, graduating in 2015. While at Converse, she was included and involved in a number of organizations and programs, including the Nisbet Honors Program, the Emerging Leaders Program, Omicron Delta Kappa, Mortarboard, and she was a peer academic coach. After graduating from Converse, she began graduate study at Texas A&M University before transferring to the Department of Biological Sciences at Clemson University, where she is currently working on parasitic diseases. Her love for writing never went away, leading to short stories and the 2017 publication of her book. Copies of this book will be available for purchase and signing by the author at 2 p.m. in Wilson Hall's Lee Parlor. Please help me welcome Converse alumna, gifted scientist, and talented writer, Natacha Karambizi.
Thank you, Dr. Becker. Good morning, Converse.
Good morning.
I am so honored to be back here. Founders Day was one of my favorite Converse celebrations, and every year I looked forward to the strawberries and cream dessert. So I'm pretty excited today. While I was preparing this speech, I read as much as I could find on Dexter Edgar Converse, the great founder of this school, whose birthday we're celebrating today. But nothing I read was more of a testimony to his life than the foundation of this school. Mr. Converse was a visionary, a man who decided to dedicate his time and finances to create a school, not just for his daughter, but for other young women to get access to higher education. 129 years later, his vision has given hundreds of women well beyond Sparrenburg, including myself and the majority of us here today, voice and value. Voice, value, vision. I call these the 3 V's that this institution has come to represent to me. But what I want to talk to you about today is resilience. The journey to achieve the 3 V's is riddled with moments where the will is tested and one has to call on to this core strength in order to push forward. To be honest, I was surprised when President Newkirk invited me to speak here today, because just 3 years ago, I sat here as a senior in the chemistry department. I certainly did not think that I would be back here standing to share my story with you. In many ways, I'm still finding myself. I'm still trying to figure things out for myself. But also 3 years ago, I was taking public speaking with Dr. Chandra Hopkins. And I was terrified to give speeches in front of my classmates. I hope you'll be proud of me today, Dr. Chandra. So let let me talk about resilience and how it has been called on in different ways in my life so far. I know that each one of us is unique, but in Maya Angelou's words in her poem, The Human Family, she says, "In minor ways we differ, but in major we're the same." With that said, I hope that at least one thing will resonate with you in the words that I have to say today. So my story begins in Rwanda. I came to the United States in 2010. I was just 18 years old. I'm sure some of you are scratching your heads like, where? Well, Rwanda is a tiny country, half the size of South Carolina, and it's located in East Africa. And you might associate River Nile with the Great Pyramids of Egypt, but did you know that the main source of River Nile is in Rwanda? And probably the second best known fact about Rwanda is the conservation of mountain gorillas, otherwise known as silverbacks. They have really done an amazing job with them, and if you can, you should visit. But more than its beauty and unique culture, Rwanda is known for a genocide. How 1 million people died in just 100 days. That's approximately 10,000 people per day, killed by machetes and other traditional weapons. It sounds like hell, doesn't it? When you Google Rwanda, images of orphaned children, widows, and scarred men still come up near the top. Just last week, when I mentioned to my Uber driver that I was from Rwanda, she said, "Oh, Hotel Rwanda, that's my favorite movie." I sighed because I get told this way too often. I told her that that was a dark part of our history, but that thankfully my country isn't anything like what you see in that movie today. Today, Rwanda is held as one of the fastest developing countries on the African continent. The UN ranked it #1 country in the world with most women in parliament, with 49 women in its 80-seat lower house of parliament and 10 women in its 26-seat Senate. That's about 63% total in both houses. If you visited Rwanda without knowing its history today, you wouldn't believe that that same country was a completely failed state just 24 years ago. So only one word comes to mind when I think of Rwanda, and that's resilience. I couldn't possibly talk about resilience without mentioning Rwanda, because when you look at its story, Rwanda is the very definition of resilience. In psychology, resilience is defined as the ability to bounce back from a negative experience with competent functioning. On a personal level, my parents, my father in particular, was my first example of resilience. In 1973, my father, who was then 17 years old, and a couple of his friends fled to neighboring Burundi. They were in secondary school at the time, living in boarding school. And tensions were rising, and Tutsi students were singled out and persecuted. It was no longer safe for them to stay there. They never got to say goodbye to their families. They needed to do what they had to do to survive. And that same year, my father's father passed away, but my father didn't find out about it until much later. He never got the chance to bury him and mourn with the rest of his family. Once in Burundi, my father started a new life and went on to get a PhD in international relations. He saw his family again 16 years later, in 1989, as a married father of 2 children. My parents knew that going back to Rwanda was dangerous at the time. Tutsis were not welcome there. But my father had decided that it was time to see his family again. While in exile, he had lost both his father and brother, so he needed to see the others before it was too late. And as it turns out, it wasn't long before it would have been too late, because in 1994, his whole family was massacred. His mother, my father's 8 siblings, and all their families were killed in the genocide. About 60 people in total. Just imagine losing 60 family members in 3 months. My father himself was hit on the head with a hammer in an attempt to kill him, but he survived. We survived. The fact that I stand here in front of you today is a miracle in itself. In a way, we were lucky. It's sad to say, but we were lucky because I grew up with children who did not get as lucky to survive with both their parents. After telling you this, you're probably imagining my father as a sad human being, but he's one of the happiest, most positive people I know. After the genocide, he started over from nothing and rebuilt the family. Instead of preaching hate and revenge, he became involved in associations for peace and reconciliation. In 2015, he met his mother's murderer and forgave him. Forgave him. The man who had killed his mother, the man who had betrayed a lifelong friendship. You might wonder how a man can possibly forgive his own mother's murderer. And I wondered the same. As I was preparing this speech, I asked my father what kept him going. How was he able to start over and be happy again? His response was that he chose to see his family and everyone that he met after the genocide. His family was no longer the people to whom he was related by blood, but everyone. He chose to preserve his faith in humanity by only seeing the good in people, and all the work he did as a professor and as a public servant aimed to bring out this goodness. Forgiving wasn't easy, but it was necessary in order for the country to move forward, in order for him to heal. That's resilience to me. Remaining objective when you have all the reasons in the world not to. Taking a negative experience and transforming it into a foundation for a greater purpose. Personally, I can't help but think that many lives could have been saved if the rest of the world had interfered sooner. After all, it went on for 100 days, with 10,000 people dying every day. So I agree with Edmund Burke, who said that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Evil can manifest in many ways, and I'm sure you can think of a few examples that are currently happening in this country. So today, I challenge you to act. Please do not be good men and good women who stand by and witness injustice in your communities and other communities without speaking up. Speaking up matters. From my own story, I have learned that resilience is not a one-character story. Sometimes you try your best and you hit a wall. And when this happens, you need to call on to your core group, your board of advisors, your cheerleaders, so to speak. People who motivate you to keep going and won't let you give up when faced with challenges. It is said that it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to sustain that growth. For me, it was my family and my host family. I am particularly indebted to both my older sisters who took a chance on me and spent all their savings to pay for my first year at Converse. My sister Diane is here in the audience today. She couldn't be here at my graduation, so this is very special to me. Without them, I wouldn't be standing here today. I'm also extremely fortunate to have had the best host family, because in my first year as a freshman, I went to the chaplain to get paired with a host family, and I was paired with an American family called the Shores, and the Shores have supported me in a way that only a family can, and our relationship grew well beyond Converse. My journey at Converse wasn't an easy one. I had hoped that hard work and earning good grades would result in a merit-based scholarship for me. And when that didn't happen, I went back to Maine, and that's where my sister was living, and I worked 60 hours a week over the summer at a lobster processing company in Maine, hoping to save enough to attend the local community college. I was a vegetarian at the time, so it was terrible. I was tired and had lost all hope of returning the following year, but Lisa Shore, my host mom, would not let me give up. She told me, "Why don't you try one last time? Just try writing a letter to President Fleming. Tell her your story and see if something can be done." And so I did. I emailed President Fleming and told her about how I had come here, how hard I had worked, and asked her if something could be done about my situation. President Fleming emailed me back and set up a meeting, and the rest is history. I was able to come back to Converse and finish my degree. I'm grateful to Dr. Fleming because in that moment, she made me feel like my story mattered and that I was part of the Converse family. And for all the times I thought about giving up, my people were there to tell me to get back up. They convinced me that I had the potential to achieve any goal that I put my mind to, even when I did not hold a map to get where my destination was. So find these people in your life, the people who awaken this ability to start over when you fail, because failure and adversity are inevitable. The ability to overcome roadblocks lies in our strength and our support system when we are at our weakest. Charles Darwin said that it is not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change. That's the natural law of selection. Whenever we listen to motivational speeches, we are often told to not give up, to keep pushing no matter what. But sometimes success lies in knowing when to change course. Resilience is also knowing when to adapt to new circumstances. Today, among freshmen, I'm sure that there are some who feel uncertain about their future here at Converse, like I did. Maybe you're a first-generation student. You might be intimidated by all the amazing people that you have met here. And maybe you feel like you don't belong, that you don't deserve to be here. Talk about your struggles. There are people on campus who will listen to you and lend a helping hand. I'm the living example of that. Don't convince yourself that you can't do it. The subject that you came wanting to major in might not end up being the one that you get your degree in, and that's okay. Resilience means knowing when to change course or adjust yourselves instead of giving up when faced with adversity. I would like to end on the reason why President Newkirk mainly asked me to speak today. I recently wrote a book called Mahoro, A Little Girl's Search for Peace. And Mahoro, the character in my book, is a child who at 9 years old finds herself in the middle of a genocide which she doesn't understand. Later, after the genocide, her world falls apart even more when she realizes that her own mother was one of the perpetrators of the genocide. While I was growing up, I encountered countless Mahoros, people who were children during the genocide, and who were carrying the shame of individuals whose actions they did not understand. In the case of Mahoro, the other half of her family was murdered as well, because Mahoro was of mixed ethnicity. She was a mix of two struggles. Mahoro embodies my motto when it comes to resilience, and that is, what's the worst that can happen after I have been pushed to what I believe to be the very bottom? There is nothing else. The only way is up. There is no other way but up. I might have to take detours. It might take me longer than I anticipated, but there is no other way but up. Human beings are complex, and there are many facets to us. Resilience means recognizing this beauty in yourself, being able to remind yourself that there is more to you than your failures, and focusing your energy on the things that you can control in the moment. So, as the school year winds down, as you prepare for your exams, as you make plans for the future, be flexible. Let challenges bend you, but don't allow them to break you. I hope you choose resilience. Thank you.